Okay, hello. What I want to talk about today is progressive web apps and how it mixes with board games, basically. How many of you play board games regularly? Oh, that's nice. Okay. How many of you are front-end developers? Okay. So you may find both topics pretty interesting. So I will mix up realities, the digital one and the physical one. The talk won't be about Web XR or Web VR. I did have the introduction already, so I'm not gonna talk about myself. There's plenty of something games.js, more games, more JavaScript, etc. What I want to talk about right now is progressive web apps, and basically how something that is basically a front-end technology can be applied to games, to web games, to board games, and I would like to encourage you and see if you can build something yourself. So the story started with me writing a tutorial for the MDN about progressive web apps. And this tutorial was supposed to be about PWAs in particular, but as a game developer, I had to use a game as an example. So if I've built something called JS13K PWA, which is what it sounds. It lists some games from the competition, and it is a progressive web app on itself. What it is exactly, I will tell you on the next slides. So, how many of you know about the JS13K games competition? Okay, quite a few. So the competition runs since 2012, and this year's theme was offline. So I decided to take advantage of that. Not that I created the competition and that I came up with the theme, but still. So I already asked about board games. So with the offline theme, you could interpret it both ways. It could be interpreted from the technical point of view. So you can implement the PWA features, which is, for example, working offline. But you can also go further and think about other ways of interpreting the offline world, which could be playing offline. Board games are obviously offline games, so why not try to mix those? How many of you know the game on the screenshot, Neuroshima Hex? Oh, that's nice. You may recognize the website, neuroshimahex.pl. It runs since 2010. So basically, I had to spend 8 years to be able to mix enclave games, the studio I run, the JS13K games competition, which started in 2012, and the Neuroshima Hex fan site about the board game. And all those things with the features of PWA, it was possible to mix all those things that don't necessarily work together if you think about it. So back like a few years ago, creating add-ons for a physical board game was like super hard. You had to print the tiles. It was really hard to distribute them, even harder to find someone who will actually print them and play the add-ons you created. So I had some ideas, but I basically just dropped them because I thought it would be just too much work to create something for the game that people would actually want to print and play. But with the offline theme from the competition, I decided to try something because I had an idea for the add-on for the board game for a few years already. But instead of building a physical add-on, I decided to try to build something that will be digital. So I could create an add-on, a game, that would work on a mobile phone, that would add something to the board game. So the idea came during this year's JS13K Games competition, in which the rules are the game you are creating have to fit inside 13 kilobytes. So that's pretty challenging. So I actually did build a prototype for my own competition, which happened like first time ever since 2012. And I had a working prototype. So the thing about the add-on is that it's pretty simple. I mean, all you have to do to play with it is just visit the website, and it's more or less a Russian roulette. So you just spin it, and so you either get one of the 5 bonuses or you lose some points. So it's super simple. It took me like, I don't know, a few hours to build. So it's not like a few months project or something like that. But it kind of works. I mean, I think the beauty of it is that it's so easy to build, so you just have to come up with some ideas. And with current technology, it should be fairly easy to build something that will enhance the experience you have from board games or something for card games, for digital games, etc., etc. So that was so the first prototype came up during the JS13K Games competition. Then I built the let's call it the final version, which you saw on the previous slide. So as I mentioned, it was like I know it's kind of silly. Everybody could probably build that that application. It's not even a full game, right? But it was the first time when I was able to mix a few different projects that weren't meant to be mixed. So I think it was interesting to think about board games, about some things that you're passionate about, the things that you work in your free time outside of your day job as a front-end developer or a game developer. And then you can actually mix that, adding some technologies. It doesn't have to be like a flat mobile application. It could be something for web VR, virtual reality or augmented reality or whatever. You could create something for your phone that would be able to, for example, scan something off of the board and calculate something for you instead of doing this manually. So I was pretty happy with being able to mix the board games with Enclave games and with the competition. But why am I telling you about this? So as a front-end developers, you probably heard about progressive web apps. That's an interesting concept. It's not new. I remember there were huge fairs in Barcelona in 2014 where we were showing mobile phones with games on them that were running on the mobile phone which had the Firefox OS operating system, which was entirely written in JavaScript. So if you would check how the games were built, how the system itself was built, you could probably already notice that many things were pretty similar. You had a manifest file with the information about your game. it could work offline, etc., etc. So the concept of progressive web apps, the concept of being able to have your website or game work as a native website or native application or native game isn't that new. But we finally have some tools with which we can make it possible. So right now, with the current state of technology, instead of having teams working on different versions for different operating systems or different platforms, iOS, Android, whatever, you as a front-end developer are able to build one version that will work on various platforms, that will take the benefits of the native applications. So you can, right now you can create an HTML5 app or game that you can install on the phone and launch without URL bar, have a shortcut on the screen, have push notifications, etc., etc. So all those things that were working only on native games and native apps, you can take advantage of that, and you can build everything natively as using JavaScript. So let's talk briefly through how the PWA looks like. So it's more or less a simple website or a game, which contains the manifest file and a bunch of files. The manifest file usually contains some basic information like the name, title, path to icons, the information about the author, etc., etc. So it's something that isn't that new. It's just a JSON file with some basic info. And the key ingredient for having PWS working is the service worker. Service worker can be explained as a separate thread that works in the background. Is a JavaScript, so you can send the messages to it. The service worker can do some magic mambo jumbo and return some information to the main JavaScript thread. So you can, for example, send some heavy calculations to the service worker, but it can also be treated as a way in which your game or application can work offline. Instead of trying to get the files that are on the server, it could be used to take the data from the cache, manipulate the data, etc., etc. If you're interested in how service workers work, you can check that. But basically, this is the key ingredient which makes the PWAs do its magic with offline capabilities. So you can launch the game on the phone, play it once, and then you don't have to worry about having Wi-Fi or 3G or whatever. This game can basically can be playable offline if you lose the connection, if the connection is poor, etc., etc. I mentioned you can add the game to the home screen, so it can look exactly the same as all the native games you have on your phone. You can even have push messages. You can send notifications from the application. This, of course, can be abused. You probably experienced some games that will throw hundreds of push notifications at you. But the cool thing is you can technically do it from the JavaScript. You don't have to use native wrappers which will create versions for iOS, for Android, etc., etc. You can use those technologies right now, and you can apply them to the games you are working on. The second presentation about animations mentions something called lazy loading. So that's the old name for it. The brand new name for it is progressive loading. It's exactly the same, but you can specify which files have to be downloaded right now and which files are not needed in the specific moment. This doesn't have to apply to websites only. This can also apply to games in a way that, for example, you can load only the welcome screen, the main screen, and then load all the other things in the background. So the initial size of the package will be, I don't know, 1 or 3 or 5 megabytes, and the user will feel the application loaded super quick, and then you can load everything else in the background. Usually the game won't be played immediately, and even if somebody will try to play it immediately, you can still then conditionally show another loading screen or do it in a way that you will load the first level with the menu and then load other levels when they need it. You can check a bunch of tutorials I wrote for MDM on this site that goes through all the details about implementing progressive web apps. I didn't want to talk much about the technology itself. The tutorials are there, but I wanted to tell you how easy it is and that you can apply this to any project, basically, in which you're using JavaScript. So all you have to do is add the manifest file, add the service worker. It's not that complicated. It's engine independent, so you can add that to basically any game or any application. It doesn't matter if the game was created with Pixie, Phaser, or whatever, or written from scratch. You can apply the progressive web apps features to it right now. So it mixes both worlds in terms of JavaScript world and the native world, in which usually the native apps, native games have the advantages, technical advantages. With progressive web apps, you can easily have access to things like push messages, like working offline, etc., etc. So it's pretty cool. You basically don't need wrappers to make your games work as native ones on mobile devices. And if you heard about responsive web design, that was pretty popular a few years ago, and people were like, I don't know. And after a few years, it's like, if you build modern websites, responsive web design is the approach you will use, because you want your games to work and websites to work on mobile devices on various different platforms. So that's just the de facto way of building stuff. So basically with progressive web apps, whenever you build another PWA, you're basically killing the term of PWA, because in the next few years, it will basically be the go-to approach of just building games and websites. So I encourage you to try PWAs, make something cool, try to mix physical world with digital, create some digital add-ons for your physical board games, etc. Thanks.